Campaigners have been marching through Oxford to demand that statues of historical figures from the colonial era be removed. In particular, they want a depiction of Cecil Rhodes to go because of his role in developing the empire in southern Africa. So do such artefacts give praise to people whose achievements now feel wrong and whose continuous presence is an insult to modern students? Or are they part of the nation's history and above changing views of the past? Lots of you getting involved via Twitter. OK, we'll bring those to you shortly. Joining us from Oxford are the historian and author, Dr. Peter Frankopan, and the PhD student, Adam Elliott-Cooper. Hello to you, gentlemen. No fisticuffs, no daggers. Doctor, to you, first of all, why should it stay?
Well, I think that it's terrific that students are talking about these things. As a historian, I love when people are engaging with the past in whatever way and shape and form. And I have to say, they've done a terrific job in raising the profile of important historical questions about how we should engage with the past. I think that having said that, there are wider questions that I'm interested in about how one can single out specific individuals, because there's a bigger, broader question about what we should try to understand our history to be, and there's a degree to which one has to question where does it end. Having said that, I do think that it's important that these topics get talked about. I absolutely recognise the point that the students are making. I don't mean it to sound glib, but I think it is fantastic that this becomes national news, talking about Benin bronzes in Jesus College, Cambridge today, and about Rhodes. It's really showing how the finest minds of the next generation are engaging with important historical questions. So I think that my colleague Adam will talk more about how he thinks that we should go from here. But I think it's great that student activism is alive and well, because it's taken 10 or 15 years to see students here get excited about anything, and it's great to see them really engaging with something so important as this.
Adam, Neil Lawrence has tweeted this afternoon. Hello to you, Neil. He says, if they, meaning students, are so against Rhodes, then ask them to return the funds they receive from the scholarships and go study elsewhere. What would you say to people like him?
I think one of the points of the campaign is to point out that the money that was accumulated by Rhodes took place through the colonial exploitation of southern Africa, and so therefore it's not Rhodes's money to give out. It's the resources of the people of southern Africa, and so having that kind of debate, I think, will help us to understand why it is that these students from southern Africa who get the Rhodes Scholarship very much deserve this money.
Professor, I wonder what people, or colleges, I suppose, like Oriel, should do, what action they should take. They're caught between students who are not happy at all and influential donors who say, if you do move those statues, we're going to withdraw our funding.
Well, you know, the past is the past, and it's very hard to change that, however angry one wants to be about the colonial past of Britain's role and others in Africa. I think there is the question of how long is a piece of string. You know, there are other important parts of our history that we are totally ignorant of, because we view history through the eyes of winners. I mean, history gets written by those who end up on top, and as a result, it's inevitable that people who end up with statues put up to them are going to come under criticism, whether that's Henry VIII, whether that's Winston Churchill, where in some parts of East and Central Europe, one can make the case that what happened at the end of the Second World War ended up gifting Central Eastern Europe into the communist world of Moscow. So I think one has to be very careful about this. And in the case of the Benin bronze at Jesus College, it's one single cockerel. In fact, there are many, many more in the Fitzwilliam Museum at Cambridge. And there does need to be a joined-up view, I think, about what does one do with these things? Who does one give them back to? How are they going to be enjoyed and examined by more people? And in fact, in the case of the Benin bronze, specifically in Cambridge, it's important to realise that these single group of sculptures were fundamental in overturning colonial views and European views about African art. I mean, they were so beautiful that the Portuguese refused to believe that they were made by African artists. And they played a fundamental role, I think, in explaining to scholars about Africa's history. So I think we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Adam?
I think that one of the ways in which European scholars can learn about the humanity and intellect of African people is by speaking to Africans themselves. They don't necessarily have to plunder the resources of Africa to do that. So I think we can maybe have a more nuanced view and study and have conversations with each other, rather than having to steal artefacts and keep them for hundreds of years.
I agree, Kay. On that, all I would add is that, you know, if you really want to strip it back and then look at the founding fathers of the United States, you know, one of the most important reasons why why America split off from Great Britain was about representation in London, but also because it was a group of slave owners who wanted to retain their rights to control slaves. And the chief, of course, the first president of the United States was George Washington. So if one's going to start this discussion about individual pieces, individual citizens and exploiters, let's say, then it does keep on going. And I would say that Africa wasn't the only continent that was exploited for slaves. Europe has a very dark historical past rooted in white slavery as well as slavery across all of Asia. And this does, the only way I think you solve this is through education. And campaigns like this, what they do is they do get people to become aware of subjects and then to go and study them properly. I think that's the best we can hope for, rather than try to correct things by tearing things down and breaking up collections.
I suppose what your response to that, Adam, would be that you're not just talking about this particular statue, and there are others as well that you feel should be removed because of what they stand for.
I think the phrase "Rhodes Must Fall" is a slogan that's been used starting in South Africa and has been continued here in Oxford. And I think what it's really doing is asking a wider question about how do we remember the British Empire? Do we celebrate it with statues and plaques, or do we reflect about it more critically? And I think having a statue of someone like Cecil Rhodes, who is probably more than any other British historical figure, the figure that represents racial apartheid and the violence that comes with it, perhaps we need to have a more critical reflection upon that kind of history.
Doctor?
Well, I think that's I can't argue with that. I think that Rhodes did what he did, and there's no attempt to try to correct that view. It's a throwaway line. You alluded to it at the beginning, Kay, as well, that Rhodes didn't have to give money to charity. He didn't have to establish a charitable foundation. And on balance, those Rhodes scholars who've been through the doors here at Oxford University have done a great deal of good for the world. And I think that if one wants to have the kind of nuanced view that Adam talks about, which I recognise that too, then one has to be deeply critical and to properly reflect and study what Rhodes did for good and bad and wrong, but also to give him some of the credit for the fact that he, unlike lots of other philanthropists, did actually put money back into the system to help young people, including people of colour, to come and study at this university.
But Doctor, I mean, we look at modern day statues, like I'm thinking about the Saddam statue that was pulled down, that was widely cheered at the time. So they do acknowledge actions of the past. And we do seem to, in the case of, say, Saddam, or do you think that one should have stayed as well in Tahrir Square?
Well, I mean, I think that you could, as a historian, I would say that statues are almost designed to be torn down. That's why we don't have any statues left in Constantinople of the great Byzantine emperors. Very, very few things survive from the past because they get destroyed as history turns over the stone and there becomes a new winner in the past. And so that process of tearing down is normally because there's a new regime that takes place. It's a revolutionary act.
I'm so sorry, gentlemen, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we need to go to Woolwich Crown Court to hear from